I mean, are you aware of the reasons for my actions? It's what everyone wants to do, which is why I do what I do. Somewhere backstage in the metal scene, a different truth was subtly resurfacing while everyone else was still burning candles and reliving Ozzy Osbourne's iconic live performances in sadness. It wasn't tears of grief or goodbyes. Long hidden under the shadow of celebrity, it was repressed anger and scorn. Now, it has come to light that musicians are on a secret blacklist. There were 6 artists that previously harbored a deep and abiding hatred for Ozzy Osbourne. He was not a legend to them. He was a hypocrite dressed in leather. Once heralded as Black Sabbath's soul, they are now accused of managing the band, excluding other members, taking composition credit, and creating false stories to influence the media. You would become frozen. In his most popular records, you'll discover that the top enemy on that blacklist is someone who used to stand side by side with Australians on stage. But behind the spotlight lurked ugly fights, last-minute show cancellations, and contracts altered overnight. Who will be the first to reveal the Prince of Darkness's actual nature? And why were they so hostile towards him? In the video that follows, learn the names of the 6 people that hated Ozzy. The end. 6th place goes to Tony Iommi. Once, they were the 2 pieces of a legendary puzzle, Ozzy Osbourne's scream, which sounded like a lost soul, and Tony Iommi's icy riffs that resembled hammers. However, behind the Black Sabbath limelight, there was simply a smoldering spark that raged for decades without any friendship. Ozzy and Iommi have never had a comfortable friendship from the start, a painful followed by tension and resentment. 2 legends traveled side by side in this manner, never sharing a common route. Tony was the bully throughout their time in Aston, Birmingham, and he haunted the gray, wet hallways of their neighborhood school. His favorite target was Ozzy, who was shy, slender, and had eyes that were always red around the edges. Later, Iommi said that he had previously reprimanded Ozzy, in part because he was envious and in part because he hated Ozzy's naive but eye-catching demeanor. Who would have thought that those 2 would produce metal's first song a few years later? How about a roar? However, despite Black Sabbath's success, interpersonal disputes become more frequent. Never one to back down, Iommi was the boss in the studio. When Ozzy started abusing drugs and acting strangely in the late 1970s, tensions started to arise. Former manager Patrick Mayan JRB claims that Iommi told the group straight out that Ozzy was no longer the primary singer but a burden. The band was overshadowed by scandal rather than music as he transformed everything into a cheap spectacle. Everything became a nightmare because of Ozzy's careless actions, intoxication, tardiness, and disarray. The band had to cease recording. Never Say Die in 1978 after Iommi hurled a microphone on the ground and said, "Either he gets sober or I leave the band." 3 days since nobody was willing to visit one another. The pivotal moment occurred in 1979 when, following numerous restless nights, Iommi discreetly called Bill Ward and Giza Butler to a private meeting. He remarked icily, "We can't continue with Ozzy any longer." No hesitancy, no feeling. The decision to fire Ozzy from Black Sabbath was approved by Tony himself. It was a betrayal to Australians by the individual he formerly referred to as his brother-in-arms. Their relationship was ruined for all time after that. While Iommi battled to maintain Sabbath's reputation with a succession of substitute singers, Ozzy went on to have enormous success as a solo artist. The media would harass Iommi whenever Ozzy released an album. "Do you feel envious?" And Tony would just grin. "I didn't create music to achieve his level of fame. I managed to live." But everyone realized the reality beneath his calm comments. A proud artist's hundreds of restless nights as he watched the person he kicked ascend to the throne. Although fans loved the latter Black Sabbath reunions, they smelt more like money and less akin to friendship. Witnesses claim that at a 1997 reunion rehearsal, Iommi barely spoke to Ozzy and simply provided guidance on musical selections, acting more like a temporary vocalist than a co-founder. Iommi seldom ever mentioned Ozzy in a positive light, even when he gradually withdrew from the stage due to illness. "We were the ones who created something great," Tony stated icily in response to a question about their relationship, "but magnificence need not be accompanied by friendship." The final time all 4 of Black Sabbath's original members performed together at the Back to the Beginning concert in Birmingham in July 2025, there was no handshake or embrace between Ozzy and Iommi, just aloof looks like 2 seasoned fighters. who fought together yet harbored bitterness. However, Tony Iommi wasn't the only one. Even Sabbath's Bill Ward, the drummer, had a deep-seated grudge against Ozzy. But starting in the 1970s, the four members worked together to lay the groundwork for modern metal. The band's low pulse was carried by Ward, who was the silent beat. Ozzy became the band's face because of his crazy and frenzied demeanor. That made Ward nervous, but he bore it for the sake of the music until fame and fortune began flowing disproportionately. To Australian, Ward once flung a drumstick at the wall in a fit of rage backstage during the 1976 Technical Ecstasy tour. "I am not the shadow of the frontman," Ward yelled in the crowded dressing room after witnessing Ozzy land a solo endorsement deal. With a scornful sneer and the pop of a beer can, Ozzy responded, ignoring him. The first crack was that one. When the news of the reunion came in the early 2010s, fans were appalled. Bill Ward said plainly, "I was treated like an outsider. In the very house I built." Australians Tony Iommi and Gizza Butler both made an appearance, but Ward was the only one. He said that the contract he was given was degrading, with low remuneration, no control over the tour's content, and even the removal of his name from advertising material. In a 2015 anonymous interview, a longtime Sabbath tech recalled that, after a heated meeting in Los Angeles, Ward demanded a fistfight with Ozzy. After the Aussie simply smirked and left, Ward drained half a bottle of whiskey and disappeared for 3 days. A close friend later remarked, "I've never seen him so broken. It was more than just a betrayal of music." In the final farewell tour, Bill Ward's name was removed from all print materials as if he had never been a member of the band. When a reporter asked him why he shrugged, he said, "I don't keep anyone. It was a betrayal of brotherhood." Ward wrote to Ozzy privately on several occasions, demanding an apology and fair recognition, but he never responded. Ronnie James Dio. Number 5 is a startling admission for this ardent fan of classic metal. The brilliant vocalist who made Rainbow and Heaven and Hell famous, Dio drug use and mental instability. When Ronnie James Dio was asked to replace him, fans exploded in anger, yelling Ozzy's name at Dio's performances. With the lunatic enjoying his waning grandeur on one side and a strong voice with the intention to establish an empire from ashes on the other, the changeover was anything but tranquil. They were holding posters that said, "Where is Ozzy?" A crack formed, and it cut deep into both their souls. Dio didn't just feel the pressure, he despised Ozzy openly. In one interview, Dio coldly stated, "Ozzy can't sing. He is unable to hold a note. He wouldn't benefit even if you locked a radio in a bag." Tensions increased when Dio was made to perform Black from the classic Ozzy era. Toyo Ozzy wasn't a musical rival. Rather, he was a stage animal, a clown supported by theatrical gimmicks. That wasn't a slip of the tongue. Rather, it was a direct hit, a fist in the face of a legend. Paranoid, Iron Man were photos, and Sabbath songs, but for Dio, it was humiliation. He detested being cast in someone else's shadow so much that, upon Black Sabbath's 2006 reunion, they changed their name to Heaven and Hell. No more Sabbath, no more Ozzy, as a statement that said, "I'm Dio." The breaking point occurred during the recording of the Live Evil album in 1982, when Dio was accused of remixing live recordings to highlight his vocals and changing arrangements without the band's consent. Internal strife broke out, and Dio walked out and slammed the table just as the band was preparing a joint tour with Ozzy. Dio stated bluntly, "I'm not going on tour to serve a clown like him," even though they never again publicly clashed. At a music event, Ozzy remained silent, at least on the surface, never retaliating with venom, but kept a cold distance when discussing Dio. On stage, Ozzy would make fun of the replacement, referring to him as the vocal coach of Demons and the little man. The shocker, Wendy Dio, Ronnie's wife and manager, claimed that the two men never truly hated each other as the public thinks. They were simply two warriors on opposing sides who were never given the opportunity to sit down together. They even existed without fists or insults, repelling each other with a silent, simmering force. The tension was icy cold during one intense backstage encounter in 1985 when Dio and Ozzy crossed paths. In one Metal Hammer interview, Dio fired a clear shot. According to witnesses, Dio purposefully turned away as Ozzy approached, muttering something about real metal and cartoon metal, as if every move Ozzy made was a staged joke. That frozen glare, that air of disdain, left bystanders breathless. Dio didn't just avoid Ozzy publicly. He maintained that stance for life.
The digital streets are trembling tonight, so everyone hold on to your ring lights. Imagine this. You're taking care of yourself. As Doom is reading through Instagram stories, a rogue live notification appears out of nowhere. Mendy notices that the tea is pouring. You anticipate a sidelong glance and perhaps a quiet, modest boast when you click. Instead, you enter a SWAT raid that is emotionally charged. Cameras tremble, commentators yell. And Mennick's eyes burn brightly as her voice cracks and she drops the decade's biggest bombshell. I have receipts, and Yandi has been hiding a baby, you know? Hold on. WH secretly pregnant. Yandandi is the mistress. Of carefully manicured couple goals and fast-paced wig changes. When did it start? Whose timeline is it? Was scripted by the hip-hop and love producers? Or was the multiverse simply more prone to glitches than